Good morning. I like that. Interactive and welcome to Adams State University. And to both to those that are here in person, but also those that are joining us online. My name is David Tandberg, and it's my enormous privilege to serve as president of Adams State University and to welcome you to today's event. This event is a special project of the Salazar Rio Grande del Norte Center, founded a number of years ago by a generous donation by the Salazar family. The center serves as the hub of all things water at Adams State. The center has collaborated with a number of community initiatives and even launched a water miner here at the university. This year's theme, Perspectives on Historical Challenges, is very fitting. It invites us to consider the recent water exportation scheme posed by the renewable water resources in the context of borders, beginning with the exploration of the acequias on both sides of the Colorado and New Mexico border. Today's presentations will carry forward in time to the Rio Grande Compact of 1939 and the current case of Texas versus New Mexico and Colorado, heard before the U.S. Supreme Court just last week. Phoebe Suina of Cochi and Felipe Pueblos will provide additional perspective on the role of the tribes. Taken together, today's presentations will provide much for us to reflect upon as we strategize for a bountiful future for the valley and its residents. The Rio Grande State of the Basin Symposium has become an annual tradition at Adams State, now in its 6th year. I'm thankful for the efforts of Dr. Nick Sines, Maya Kyle Miller, and Carol Osborne, and everything they did to make today's event happen. A search is currently underway to hire the next director of the center, and we hope to announce that person's identity very soon. Many of you in the audience are joining us virtually via Zoom. A special thank you is owed to Jeremy Haramil for coordinating the virtual component of this program. I'm also grateful as well for the entire PR marketing team at Adams State, which has been key to the success of today's event. Linda Raylier, Amy Kuchera, Peggy Dunn, thank you all for everything you've done. My final task before you this morning is to introduce the next speaker who will give a legislative report. Senator Cleave Simpson is a former chair of the Adams State University Board of Trustees and serves as general manager of the Rio Grande Water Conservation District. Adams State and the entire valley is fortunate to have Cleave serve us in Denver. He's been a key ally of Adams State and a good friend and mentor of mine. I've also introduced Craig Cotton, who many of you have known for many years. He's the division engineer for the Colorado Division of Water Resources and is a nationally known expert on all things water. Thank you both for joining us this morning.
Thanks, President Tandberg. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. It reminded me, I think, of the inaugural event that happened here in 2019. We woke up that morning to pretty horrendous driving conditions, but we still ended up with about 300 people here in attendance. So it was before the pandemic and before Zoom, and the world was much different. But it was pretty exciting then to have, again, given the challenges of getting here, to have over 300 people here was pretty amazing. And so a heartfelt thank you from me to Rio de la Vista for really getting that very first one up and running and really set the stage to get us to where we're at today. And as President Tandberg noted, I was asked to give a legislative update, an interesting opportunity to visit with folks this morning. And for perspective, like, I've been in the General Assembly just over 3.5 years now. My first 3 years was really highlighted by, given the pandemic, was really highlighted by an abundance of funding opportunities. Federal dollars in the billions range were flowing into the state, which afforded me an opportunity to be part of several of those that put $30 million towards watershed restoration, another $20 million towards establishing a loan and grant program for agricultural producers, particularly young and disadvantaged producers. The $60 million that we got for this watershed and the Republican River watershed about compact compliance and sustainability. So the stage was much different my first 3 years than what it is today. We're a lot more challenged from a budgetary perspective this year. There just isn't that flow of federal dollars. That spigot has turned off. So it's got pretty challenging in that space, harder to fund some really big programs. So this session, and it's been interesting. Last year in particular, there was a real focus and intentional focus about water on the heels of continued drought and the challenges on the Colorado River system in particular. The governor spoke about how important in his state of the state, and the first time in my tenure, he kind of focused on water. Also, the Senate president in his speech to the Senate and the Speaker of the House in her presentation to the House all highlighted how important water conversations were going to be at the Capitol. So last year, there was certainly conversation, but not a lot of action. And then ironically, this year, there's been very little conversation publicly about water and the challenges the state faces, and some incremental progress, I guess. Some smaller bills, I'll talk about some that I've sponsored that have been successful, and then highlight kind of the two biggest things really that are still yet to be debated at the Capitol. So this year in particular, on the heels of a bill I sponsored a couple years ago about a turf buyback program where, again, we had money. So we put $4 million towards CWCB and helping communities, municipalities, and water providers stand up programs to pay people to take their Kentucky bluegrass out and replace it with native vegetative cover. That was like when I signed on to that bill, I thought, all right, it's a feel-good kind of bill. But I tell you, when it passed, my office was flooded with people calling, Front Range people calling and say, how do I participate? I was like really shocked and go, all right, this actually has some momentum. And we'll work on trying to continue that program going forward. So on the heels of that, though, the turf buyback program this year, really with help and promotion from Denver Water, was a bill we ran that the governor signed that prohibits public entities, governmental entities, and commercial businesses from going forward planting what we characterized as non-functional turf. So you get in a little bit of debate about non-functional turf, but it says don't plant Kentucky bluegrass in areas that the only traffic it ever sees is when it gets mowed. So the governor signed that. It'll have a small incremental influence going forward. There's a bill still in the House that I've sponsored. It's about incentivizing, that might not be the right word, but the reuse of gray water. So that'll be interesting. And how do you balance that with public safety? But how do you reuse that gray water in domestic applications going forward? I've got one sitting in Appropriations Committee right now. It's about water quality, and we're characterizing it as a green infrastructure bill. This really came in collaboration with folks at CU about a concept about, is it feasible and practical to meet certain water quality standards with investments in natural systems versus what we would characterize as gray or brown infrastructure instead of building a $30 million wastewater treatment plant? Can you invest in some natural systems upstream and still get the water quality standard you're seeking? That should go through. Again, we're working with CU and CSU. We find out, is it feasible to do that, and then stand up 3 pilot projects to demonstrate its viability. So CU has been really, and they have grant money, so it doesn't have a big fiscal note to it, which makes it pretty palatable in the General Assembly. I think we'll get that done. But then the two kind of biggest legislative policy discussions coming forward that haven't yet unfolded at the Capitol really has to do with a U.S. Supreme Court ruling last year, Sackett versus the EPA, and really the definition of what are waters of the U.S. And that definition of waters of the U.S. and who has authority over, in this instance specifically, we're talking about dredge and fill activities in the state, where the Corps of Engineers had authority and regulatory authority over projects and permits in a dredge and fill capacity. The Supreme Court's ruling last year changed the definitions of water of the U.S., which then changed the Corps of Engineers' responsibility and created what we've commonly referred to as gap waters. What was covered under waters of the U.S. effectively today, based on the Supreme Court's ruling, is not covered by waters of the U.S. So there's a whole effort and a political conversation about how do we cover and protect wetlands in ephemeral streams, are largely what this conversation is about. So there's a bill in the Senate that has one approach to this problem or challenge, and a bill in the House that takes a different approach to solving the problem. So you have two different perspectives that we'll have to figure out going forward. Do we want to, and this is about standing up a permit program in Colorado under some Department of Natural Resources. One of them proposes to do that. And then in CDPHE in another proposal. So do you want to stand up a permit program? What does it look like and who has authority over it? And the clock is ticking. By Constitution, we can only be in the General Assembly 120 days. And I think it may have been yesterday, there's only 40 days left in the session. So the clock is ticking. We're running out of time. I looked this morning, there are still 450 bills to action in this 40 days, and we are still introducing bills. And look, I've agreed to be on a couple of those that are still being introduced. One of them was the ballot initiative we passed a couple of years ago about online gaming and the revenue from online gaming supporting water projects. When that ballot proposal was passed, it set a cap of 29 million was the most we would collect to fund water projects. Well, the revenue from online gaming is easily exceeding the 29 million. So we're going to offer a policy to capture more of that to continue to fund water projects in the state. So again, I'm mixing lots of conversations, but that big waters of the U.S. will have to unfold over the next, less than 40 days now when we get back Monday. So that'll be really interesting and following. It has big impacts on the development community, the environment, water right holders. So it's really important to pay attention to that. And then the last really kind of big thing still yet to come was last summer, there was a drought task force for the Colorado River. That task force met, I don't know, 6 or 8 or 10 times over the interim. They offered some recommendations to put forward. And so I know Senator Dylan Roberts was really the principal sponsor for standing that task force up. I know, and I've talked to him, I know he's on the cusp of introducing, for lack of a better term, like an omnibus bill that will adopt some or all of those recommendations from the drought task force. So that, I looked this morning, he still hasn't introduced that. So I know it's still coming, and that'll be another big one, but it does have a lot of legwork and background behind it. So, and the recommendations that came out of the task force, not surprisingly, were not earth-shattering. They're not going to change the world. They're not going to solve the challenges on the Colorado River system, but incrementally, one of them was to continue that turf buyback program. So excited to see, hopefully that'll, and I'm sure it will, we'll be back in this proposal from Senator Roberts. So looking forward to see how this unfolds over the next less than 40 days now, and encourage you all to try to keep up, because it moves pretty fast. In the next 450 bills in the next 30 something days will be interesting. So I'm happy to be here and the opportunity to speak at the Symposium again, and wonderful to see us all back in person again, and look forward. I'm going to stick around all morning, so happy to engage with folks, and I think we're ready to turn it over to Mr. Cotton. Thank you all very much.